Welcome to the Sportsman's Voice podcast, your inside connection to outdoor legislation. From the Beltway to policy happening your way, we're covering it all. I'm your host, Fred Bird. Join us as we explore public land access, wildlife and fisheries management, Second Amendment rights, the triumphs that shape our nation, the sports we all love, and the stories that fuel our passion for the great outdoors. This is the Sportsman's Voice podcast. Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to this feature edition of the Sportsman's Voice podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. It is my pleasure this week. I finally get to do it. I've been teasing it, since last turkey season, and now I get to nerd out and talk turkey. The foremost expert, and I don't think that's hyperbole at all, is joining us on this episode. 30 years of professional experience, National Wild Turkey Federation distinguished professor at a University of Georgia. The one and only Dr. Mike Chamberlain joins us on the program. It's good to see you, sir. How are you?
Good to see you, man. I'm doing good. Ready to get out in the woods and chase birds.
Yeah, we're in the thick of turkey season. This is we'll touch on some policy, but this is more fun and kind of break up a lot of the stuff we've been doing here at the state level and just a lot of the grinding in the policy world. But first and foremost, the state of wild turkeys. People that turkey hunt, we all know we're diehards. We're into policy. We're into science, and so much more. Certain parts of the country have experienced ups and downs with turkeys. Where I live in the Northeast, feels like we're in a good place. Can you give us like a 40,000-foot view of what the state of the wild turkey is today?
Yeah, it really depends on where you live and where you chase birds. Like you alluded to, the Northeast and other there are some places in the country that turkeys are doing quite well, but unfortunately are broad areas where turkeys have struggled the last few decades and populations have declined and in some cases, you even have situations where turkeys are even overabundant and problematic to human interests. So it really just kind of speaks to the complexity of the birds' populations and how they're structured through space. But I'm encouraged. Even some of the populations have declined the most precipitously in parts of the southeast. Some of those populations in certain states appear to be recovering a bit and have increased, and that's a good sign.
What are the pressures, I guess, probably the best way to put it. I kind of want to dial in on a couple different things, but obviously you have urban sprawl, access issues with that comes with that, and each state has their different discharge distances. So, I think up here specifically in a state like Massachusetts, where there's so many people, and you have these really large dis- discharge distances, which cuts off so much access and acreage. Um, that helps those turkeys in the suburbs, like you said, become problematic because there's no one to take care of them or no one to manage them, right? Um, so between human pressures, other things going on environmentally, what are turkeys facing that's kind of getting after them right now?
Yeah, I think really just across the species range, it's just habitat loss and fragmentation and just the fact that we're losing wildlife habitat, not just turkey habitat, but wildlife habitat at such an alarming rate. And then, as you go out into Midwestern areas, it may not necessarily be that there is a loss of habitat. It can just be changes to agricultural practices and things that influence the availability of resources on the landscape for turkeys. And that's kind of what I see in my travels. It takes getting to areas, particularly say out west, to see situations where conditions are not changing at such a broad scale that they are in the south and in the east and midwest.
State to state comparison, state agencies manage their turkeys a little differently. Um, Practices from us, the folks that go out there and do the hunting, to baiting laws, bag limits at all. Um, Obviously, it can't be standardized across the board for some of the reasons you just said, and there's just no one size fits all across the country. Controversial topics like fanning and reaping. So I don't work for NWTF anymore, right? So I can talk about this now
Yeah.
and have been. An example where I live in New Hampshire, this was a legal practice. The state agency and its commission voted to make it illegal across the board out of fear of safety. Now, back then, and gosh, I think you and I had a conversation, not the last Wild Turkey Symposium, but the one before that was in, shoot, it
North
was
Carolina, I believe.
North Carolina. Yeah, it was in Asheville. That's exactly. I was like, it was somewhere warm. Yeah. So back then, the conversations I was having around this, and it's again, I acknowledge it's super controversial in our little turkey world. There was no science being done on it yet. Here in 2026, I still see it. I still hear the conversations around it that it for sure kills more turkeys. It for sure kills more uh, toms that are breeding and taking them out of that recruitment pool. Um, just I want to get your finger on the pulse of that. Is that something that's been explored? Have people in your profession sat down and someone taken this up and said, "Okay, I'm going to do a study on this and start um, see if we can dial it in." To that point, um, Butler and I talked about this. He's Mississippi,
Hmm.
going back years, and I asked him the same question. He's like, "Well, no, it's." He's like, "As soon as you say you're from the government, people don't want to answer your questions. Like,
Right.
we can ask questions, we can do surveys. Did you use decoys? Did you do this? Do you do that? But there's no control. It's really hard to get people to be honest." So, with all that said, can you bring us up to the current state of that controversial issue in turkey fanning and reaping in 2026?
Yeah, I mean, from a science research perspective, basically what the conversation you had with Adam Butler was, I mean, that's basically where we still are. Designing a study to specifically address whether fanning and reaping, disproportionately remove males, whether they does it increase harvest rates, does it change which individuals are going to be harvested versus not? That's a really hard question to answer. And to your point, we lie, right? As turkey hunters, we lie, and so just asking hunters, did you use this technique, whether it's fanning or whether it's a decoy or whatever it is, you're fraught to get biased, information. And so it's just a tough topic to study. And at the end of the day, if it doesn't change the percentage of toms that are removed and it doesn't change when those toms are removed, then it wouldn't matter. That's what we need to
Mhm.
understand is, does it increase harvest rates, and does it change the timing of when certain individuals are harvested or not? And if it does, then it could be impactful. But again, we just don't know.
I think all of us purists and beyond, anyone that turkey hunts, we want the best thing for the resource on the ground where we live, where we hunt, or where we travel to hunt. So if there was ever a study that bore all that out, that gave that data, and was like, listen, we got to stop doing this. And I think most of it was, yeah, okay, but it's hard. It's a hard pill to swallow when, you know, people are, backyard biologists have their thoughts and opinion, but someone like you can just say what you said. It's like, well, there's really no data on this. This is more of a personal preference and anecdotally what you're seeing. I could tell you that when I was trying that method, if I had to guess, I was probably successful 25% of the time. I ran more gobblers off than I did bringing them in, right? Doing that. So that was my experience. So it differs from other people, but for me, and I think with policy making, having the science, having data sets to go off of helps set that policy. And I don't know for what it is. I appreciate you tackling that. I just wanted to hear from someone at your level, and I think it's important to communicate to the broader community that it's unsettled science and no one's actually taken this up. And you kind of do you, but like for the state of New Hampshire, when they outlawed it, there was anecdotes of, this is highly effective, but they kinda did a carte blanche thing for safety, and they did it for private property, so, again, from a policy standpoint, it's like, well, you can't tell the state agency what we can and can't do on the land they manage in those wildlife management areas. But if I have a tract of land and it's posted and that's deemed safe in my eyes, feel like you should be able to do that. But that's
It's certainly a contentious topic.
yeah,
There's no question. And there's people that love it. There's people that hate it. And to your point, it creates there's further complications because you have agencies that don't manage the behavior the same, right? It's legal here, not legal there, and that creates kind of situations where you're already sticking turkey hunters into bins anyway, right? I don't do that because the law prevents me from doing it, and so you know, that hunter could look at a hunter that does use the practice because it's legal in his or her state, and they somehow can view that person and their experience differently. And I get it. I understand the concept, and I in my own experiences, I don't fan and I don't reap. Have I done it? Yes, I have. The few times that I was involved with it many, many years ago, there was no question in my mind in a couple of situations, the bird that died was not going to die that day, right? It just wasn't going to happen. But to my earlier point, does that matter at a population level? And that's what researchers are trying to study with everything that we're doing is not individual bird on individual property or in Fred's area or whatever, but at a population scale, does it matter? And that's where the science is lacking relative to fanning and reaping.
continuing with this line of thought on pressures for the bird. So, this audience has heard me talk about it when I have talked turkey. There's things we can't control. We can't control the weather. We can't control, avian predation because you can't kill owls and hawks right now. Um, Things we can control, ground predators, meso predators, people getting into trapping. Uh, that's not the end all be all, but it's a hell of a good start. Things you can do on your private property. So you have pressures like that, but then, especially when COVID started. Now we have friends that have been doing this for years, working on this 49 state slam quietly. It's not quiet anymore. And I think, between the YouTubes and everyone having a voice, which, is great on one hand, but then, on the other hand, it educates a lot of people like, hey, you can go do this too. From a funding standpoint, and we're in keeping with the policy here, I think it's great because non-residents contribute. They go buy those licenses. They contribute to the broader sense of ecotourism. They're buying those licenses. That's more money going to those state agencies that are getting matched through PR dollars at the federal level. So we like to see that. We like the agencies to stay healthy. From a turkey standpoint, is there a reason we should stop promoting something like this? Are the influx of non-resident hunters in this very short window of time adding pressure on the landscape to these birds? And how should some of the state agencies have already looked at that. They've gone up precipitously on the cost of non-resident tags, kind of keeping some people away that just can't afford it, but other people that are going to do it are going to do it.
Yeah, so I don't think there's any question that there's more pressure on the bird, across the bird's range now than there was, 5, 6, 7 years ago. I mean, anybody that travels to turkey hunt has seen it, whether it be states that now limit non-residents through reduced tags or increasing non-resident license fees, that type of thing. And I mean, I see it in my own travels. I can remember back, 7 or 8 years ago, for instance, getting a tag in Nebraska was as simple as just you know getting three over the counter
Yeah.
and you're done. And I think this year 10,000 non-resident tags sold out in an hour. It's crazy.
Obviously, the driver. Well, a few funny things I think is that and I think this goes beyond just turkey hunters, but we especially like to have these competitions within our community. Whether it's features of different sizes or oddities, or the standard slam that was going after the would be subspecies to if there's something we can be competitive about, somehow we find a way. And now with all the provinces in Canada open to turkey hunting, so now there's a provincial slam. You got turkeys overseas. That I mean, someone's going to put something together there between Europe, New Zealand, and wherever else we've got them. So in the chase for those subspecies, this is where I wanted to go and kind of segue into the DNA project that you guys have stood up, which is just amazing. Is it worth it? Are people chasing the subspecies, finding out that by your science, the turkeys are not always what they seem?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. um, yeah, I mean, part of the reason um, that we started Wild Turkey DNA was to be able to get at the subspecies questions and to really critically evaluate the distribution of the subspecies, where they occur, where they may not occur, that they were believed to occur. It's one of the many objectives of the project, but we're already seeing through our ongoing testing that in some states that are believed to be entirely one subspecies or mostly one subspecies, that a lot of the birds that we've tested that just look like normal wild turkeys are not one subspecies or the other.
Mhm.
They're hybrids of multiple subspecies, and that's one thing we're really curious in mapping out, particularly as you go out west, because you know as well as I do that during restoration, when turkeys were being trapped and transported all over the place, the eastern subspecies, in the south and the east and upper Midwest, that for the most part, easterns went to where easterns were supposed to be historically. But when you get out west, it was a free for all in many states where multiple subspecies were translocated. Part of that was because there was this thinking that depending on elevation and terrain, certain subspecies might
Mhm.
do better in certain areas than others. And part of it was just the zeal to restore wild turkeys to, everywhere they could live, resulted in states accepting whatever turkeys they could get their hands on. And so that's why when you look at a range map, you go out to states like in the Pacific Northwest and you see maps that have pockets of different subspecies in it. And while that might be true, uh, we'll know soon, at least genetically, whether those populations are truly that subspecies or whether they're hybrids of multiple subspecies. And then the question becomes, okay, does that matter? Um, yeah, I mean, you would think that there's a reason, for instance, Merriam's historically occurred in the areas where they did. There's a reason Rio Grande's historically lived where they did. That right? There's an ecology that each subspecies they're adapted to living in certain areas. The eastern subspecies is a forest dwelling bird. Merriam's are high elevation mountain turkeys. Same with Gould's. And so the question then becomes, does mixing subspecies, is that a good
Mhm.
thing? Or does it undermine their ecology by mixing them together, if that makes sense? And I don't know the answer to that. And that's part of why we're doing the
I can
research.
remember a project where wasn't a long time ago, they were taking turkeys out of Maine and transferring them to Eastern Texas. Ecology, I guess, somewhat lined up, but I was curious what would happen if those birds started wandering west and how they would handle, the difference. Because certainly, the white pine forests of Maine are a hell of a lot different than anything in Texas, truly. But they seem to be, generalists, if I could reduce it to that, and get along pretty well. I couldn't say if you took Merriam's and dropped them over in the East, if they would do alright, maybe in the mountainous areas, but, um, to your point, those Easterns seem to do alright wherever they're at, and to that point, we were talking about Washington State off air, and as I understand it, I've never been there, but there's supposedly a Washington Slam where you have 3 subspecies inhabiting that one state.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, that goes back to those trap and transport days where, the turkeys that were available to be moved to this part of Washington during this particular year or during these years came from, right, the Rio Grande subspecies or the eastern subspecies or whatever it is. And so you ended up with what was believed to be pockets of turkeys that were a certain subspecies. And has that persisted through time? I don't know. I think probably in some situations where turkeys were moved into mountain ranges where they were isolated from other mountain ranges, given what we see with turkeys in that they don't disperse a long distance in most cases. Maybe these pockets of turkeys are, genetically the subspecies from which they, originated, but we'll see.
I remember when I learned about, and it probably preceded the oh, it was the trying to remember that. I should know the name of the project off the top of my head. 2000, where they were just trying
Target 2000.
Project 2000, right?
Target
Target
2000.
2000.
Yep.
But even before then, where they were, when I say they, like state biologists, agency personnel were trying to establish turkeys on the ground, and they were mixing them, or they were trying to raise heritage type birds and release them, and then biologically they just weren't equipped, and they were, they do a release, and then they would all die off. There was no turkeys to be found the next year.
Yeah. Yeah, and the whole notion of using game farm birds, which occurred prior to the restoration activities that involved trapping wild birds, those were largely failures, and we actually are seeing through the DNA testing that the presence of heritage genetics is quite widespread
Yeah.
in certain areas. And for listeners, a heritage turkey is just simply a variety of turkey that was originally created by breeding a wild bird to a domestic bird, and then those birds have been crossbred and line bred with each other to produce certain plumage patterns, and we know from our testing so far that sometimes those birds escape or they're released. There's even documentation which we'll publicize at some point that certain states had heritage turkeys on, in on properties, and those birds were breeding with wild birds, and then the hybrids of those were transported elsewhere and released. And so that creates a lot of genetic complexity across the landscape, and that's what we're already starting to tease out. So, for instance, I don't know that this will be the end result, but thus far, every turkey we've tested from Kansas has been genetically a hybrid, an intermediate of an Eastern and a Rio.
Yeah.
Now, whether that, if with 100 more samples or 200 more samples, if that will bear out the same, I don't know. But when you plot birds from Kansas, similar to several other states like North Dakota or Nebraska, they clump together, and they're not genetically clustered with Easterns or Rio Grandes. They're by themselves. And what that tells you is that they're mixed ancestry. And I'm just curious, as we continue the study, if that's something that's quite widespread. And again, if so, what does that mean? And one thing we're starting to try to really nail down is, when odd plumage pops up in turkeys, what does that mean?
Mhm.
Like it, and people may say, well, who cares? Well, a very likely cause of odd plumage is inbreeding. And so when you have multiple parents that have recessive traits, and you start mixing those, and you're producing birds with really odd plumage, that means they have multiple recessive traits. That's probably not a good thing.
Yeah.
And so that's something that we are really keen to try to better understand, is when you get these birds, like while we've been sitting on this podcast, you know, two emails have popped up from Katie Tucker with Wild Turkey DNA, sending me images of solid white birds that have been harvested in the past day or two, and the hunter is requesting a kit to submit a sample so that we can figure out if the bird's wild or not. And so that's something that we're seeing a lot of, and I'm not sure if that's because people are now more aware of the project, or whether this is something that's been going on and we just didn't know about it
Mm.
because of some, social media or whatever. So it's a fascinating topic to me.
Oh, I mean, and forgive me if I get this wrong, but I think the duck DNA project helped spawn some of this, if I understand the history right. And I've
That's
met
right.
duck hunters that go crazy for it, and they share the information. I mean, if nothing else, it's really neat, when you're not sitting in your chair, because for you, this is the science and the asking why and answering the questions. And, sometimes those questions don't get answered right away. But, sitting back watching this, when you see someone send in what appears to be a hybrid black duck mallard, and it comes back, yep, sure enough, here's this percentage of these two ducks. It's like, oh, wow, that's like Jurassic Park, nature finds a way for me. Just really crazy that they get together and do that. But it is concerning because that's what I was going to ask. Like, so what? Okay, so these things are not what we thought they were. But to your point, if there isn't a genetic diversity, what's the negative effects down the line for wild turkeys as a whole? Do they keep figuring it out? Does nature find a way, or are they so inbred that you're going to have a cost to the populations?
Well, and that's one thing we're particularly interested in really diving deep into is what we're already seeing is that in some of our populations where my field crews have been trapping birds for years, and we have hundreds and hundreds of samples from adults, and we have DNA from hatched poults that we get from the eggshell membranes. So now, we're literally, you're talking thousands of birds in in 100 square mile area. What we're seeing in some populations is pretty high levels of inbreeding.
Mhm.
And so, to where, say, within a flock, everybody's at least a cousin, if not more closely related.
Mm.
And we're wondering whether, is that something that's widespread? But if you think about it practically, when you end up with high inbreeding levels, at some point you should expect there to be fitness consequences
Yeah.
to individuals, right? And their productivity would be lower, their survival would be lower, they would be less resilient to environmental change, less resilient to problematic things on the landscape like habitat loss, like we were
Yeah.
talking about earlier. And so I don't know the answer to this yet, but one of the underlying reasons that we really started this project was this. It was this question.
Yeah.
I was seeing this information, um, and I essentially contacted Phil Labretsky last Super Bowl Sunday, last spring, and said, "Look, what if we did this? Like, what could if I gave you a tissue sample from a turkey, could you do what you've done with ducks?" And he said 100%. And so that's where, I mean,
Mm.
that's what launched this is, okay, let's start with these odd plumage birds, because one, hunters will latch on to that, and two, we didn't know if the project would work, to be frank with you. We didn't know what to expect, and we didn't have but so many resources available to us. We only had a fairly shoestring budget available that we could use. And so we launched it, and we kind of figured, let's see what happens. And boy, it took off. And now, I tell people this, and it's true. This project has become a full time job for me. It's a lot, and but that's good,
Yeah.
because the fact that turkey hunters are driving the science to me is so cool. As a turkey hunter and as a scientist, that is just cool to me.
And I think in the earlier conversation, I referenced whatever it was 7 years ago, or maybe a little bit less than that. But we remarked that, you know, what sets turkey hunters aside, I don't have a problem saying this in any other pursuit, is the science quotient. We are so interested in it. And I mean, we may not know how to execute it like you and your colleagues do, but damn it, we're interested in, we want to know, facts, we want to know statistics, we want to know the data. It drives us, and I think it's remarkable. And again, no knock on anybody else that's out there hunting whitetail or whatever it is you do, but I found that out through conversations. It wasn't just always the foolishness you see on TV and the goofiness that comes with that and the memery that's created from that. I saw more people in more numbers tune into the NWTF podcast that I had hosted when we had stuff like your information on there, people in that are professionals. And I think I recorded that entire symposium. There was a whole catalog of that was some of the best rated stuff that show ever put out because people were like, "Yes, finally I can get these questions answered. Or at least somebody's going to give me information." Everyone likes a good turkey hunting story around a campfire. Like it feels baked in the cake. When you bring this stuff out, you're damn right. Turkey hunters show up, and it's really cool to see that.
Yeah, turkey hunters are the most, I think, are more cerebral than folks that focus on other
Yeah,
species. And that's not a knock to
right.
anybody. I'm not being critical of anybody. I'm just saying that as a collective group, we are very opinionated and we're very cerebral.
Mhm.
Um, and we want information about the bird because turkey hunting is it's just different than other types of hunting. And I think it gets in your DNA, no pun intended, because the bird becomes part of who you are, the fabric of who you are.
Mhm.
And if you're really passionate about turkey hunting, it's just different. You think differently and you soak up information and you're constantly seeking to get information that's rigorous, and you might not always agree with the information, right? But you digest it anyway. And I unfortunately I deal with this all the time on social medias, people that are critical of this, that, and the other, and that's fine. They can be critical of whatever they want, but I still want to put the information out, and because as long as more people value it than discount it, then that's my job. That's what I do.
I think, and again, social media is kind of an exacerbator of some of this stuff, and some very small populations of people in communities with the loudest mouths get heard, and it's exaggerated. But the science is the science as we have it today. The work you and your colleagues are doing is the standard now. This is what it is, and just with this information alone, it's changed, literally changed the game and how people are looking at things. And I'm looking at my wall. The audience can't see it, but a lot of turkey fans over there on that side of the room, and I'm looking at fans that have characteristics of Rios, that have creamy tips. These are all New Hampshire, New England birds. Like they're not over here; they're Easterns. A colleague of mine from the Eastern Shore of Maryland sent you guys in a sample last year because her husband killed one, and she sent it to me. She's like, "What do you think?" And I said, "Shit, that looks like a Merriam's. Where did you kill that?" She's like, "Eastern Shore, Maryland." It came back Eastern, but the plumage was different. It was really wild. And to your point, I think someone shared one of your Facebook or Instagram posts. Might have been Outdoor Channel as we're recording this today. It was an all white bird, all white, 100% wild. I was like, "Holy smokes!" This is so interesting. And so, getting back to what you said about the inbreeding and the diversity. While white birds look cool to us, and Airfinger quote phase birds, smoke phase birds. I always think it's funny saying phase because like they never change it. For me, phase means you go in and out of something, but they're never really changing it. But nevertheless, those real smoky ones with the cool black bands, like from a biological and survivability standpoint, they don't blend in. Like that's terrible camouflage, and you would think like predators will be picking them off. And the fact that you're getting any of these, light colored birds to adulthood is remarkable in and of itself. But from a survival ability standpoint, like that should work against the bird.
100%, yeah. And you would, what's really interesting is, when we started this project, I'll be honest with you, completely transparent. I thought these solid white birds were domestic origin.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought these birds that are popping up on social media, I was like, I don't think that's a wild turkey. And boy, I have been proven wrong. And that's why you do the science.
Yep.
A lot of these white birds that we've tested are 100% wild birds. And I have to wonder, as we obtain more information, hunters reach out to me. I give seminars. For instance, the other day I was giving a seminar at an event, and I asked the audience. There were probably 150 people standing there watching me. Raise your hand if you've ever seen a smoke or white bird in your local area, and half the audience raised their hand. And I've started getting information from hunters that have reached out to me with pictures of a local flock that might have 4 or 5 smoke colored birds in it, or 3 or 4 white birds. And I start asking the hunters, hey, is that flock isolated? Like, is it kind of in its own area? And most of the time, the response is yes.
Oh,
This, and I'm wondering as we get deeper into this, if part of the odd plumage issues we're seeing, like white birds or smoke colored birds, is a product of the flock, that local flock being isolated. And if they're isolated and there's no gene flow coming into the flock from outside, then through time you would expect inbreeding potential to be higher, and you would expect odd plumage to
mm,
start becoming more frequent. And if that's the case, that's not a good thing. To
right,
your point, yes, the bird looks cool, but the conditions, if this ends up being the case, I'm not answering
right.
the study's questions, in year one, but if that's the case, then that's a problem
Yeah.
that we're going to need to address.
I think it was Nick Backner did a study on nest phenology and got to trying to answer the question of hens on the landscape. Who's doing the most recruiting, like the most successful nest recruitment? And I think his data, and if I'm screwing this up, you can correct me or Nick can call me and correct me. I think he determined that 20% of the hens on the landscape are the ones doing all the work. Couple that with the science that says there's a dominant tom or two in the area that are doing all the successful breeding with that hen, and then you look at all the birds that are around them. It's remarkable that they're even there in the numbers they are. When I look at that, and I was like, really, there's only a couple of them that are doing all the work. Um,
Yeah.
and he,
And we're wondering whether that's part of that we're wondering whether turkeys are just kind of predisposed to having lower genetic diversity than say some other species that are promiscuous, that just,
Mhm.
everybody mates with
Right.
everybody. In the turkey world, you do have dominance hierarchies that dictate, which males breed. We know from our own research that a small percentage of hens produce most of the poults, and those hens produce those poults every year. It's the same hens that are producing poults. There are many hens that never produce
Mm,
a nest successfully. And so we're wondering whether turkeys are just kind of predisposed to have lower diversity. And if so, then the loss of habitat, fragmentation, those high predation, high harvest, anything that could lower abundance in a certain area could be more problematic if you've got a bird that's not getting an influx of genes from outside. And what one thing we've seen really clearly, Merriams are the exception to this. Merriams, uh, they essentially migrate from their breeding areas to their wintering areas and back. But the other subspecies, particularly easterns, they don't move that far. Like they leave their winter flock and they just travel, nearby, and they breed, and they go back to the same areas every year. And we don't see, a juvenile hen that walks 20 miles to somewhere else. I mean, it occasionally happens, but a lot of the times the juveniles are just going next door when they disperse, if you will. So they're not traveling a long distance to take genetic material elsewhere. And if so, then gene flow in turkeys would require more contiguous habitat, right? And as we lose habitat, given what we've just talked about, it stands to reason that maybe part of what we're seeing is the fact that that contiguous nature of the habitat is gone, and now you've got true pockets of turkeys that are isolated. And if so, it would take time for that to become a problem, right? It
mhm.
would take time for that, but eventually it's going to become a problem, and that's part of why we're doing the study.
Yeah, so this is a great segue and kinda getting toward the last chapter of this show here, is the policy part of this. You're talking out west and you're talking Merriams, and literally they move from one range to the other, just like some of the undulates on the landscape there. It makes me think of current legislation that's down on the hill in wildlife corridors. And the connectivity and keeping those contiguous acres together, they're not getting fragmented um, by fence rows, by development, and then having areas that are traditional travel routes separated by roads or what have you, and then putting the underpasses, the overpasses. This is important legislation that we're trying to get across the finish line because it has of course, applicability out there, and that kind of brought that on is those big ungulates, but it also has applicability east of the Mississippi for other non-game species as well. But this is policy that shapes what you just talked about. If we don't have contiguous acres, we continue to have habitat loss. Not only turkeys getting screwed up, but all the rest of it. And I can only imagine like if how some of this research can be placed onto other populations of different animals if there's correlations there, if they go through the same thing.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any arguing that, efforts to ensure connectivity of species on the landscape where dispersal can occur is fundamental to conserving and sustaining the species that we hunt and or don't hunt. And as you know this better than most. I mean, typically wildlife loses when
Mhm.
it comes to competition for land use. Wildlife are typically not going to win that debate because competing land uses that generate economic revenue and et cetera, more so than say hunting or conservation are going to win. But if you kind of look at the future of, we're talking about wild turkeys, you look at the future of the wild turkey. If you're anywhere in the far two-thirds of the United States, unless you're somewhere out west where land use changes haven't accelerated like they have where I live, we better figure out a way to prioritize conservation of not just wild turkeys, but the vegetative communities they inhabit and that they thrive in. Because if we don't, we're going to run into a brick wall down the road. And so anything that will incentivize private landowners to manage lands, to conserve lands for wildlife, anything that could financially, incentivize people to do that, putting science-based information out there for people to digest that they can use to improve their properties. Anything we can do to influence the political process, to influence farm bill programs, to influence funding that's allocated for those types of things is going to be important to the future of the bird.
Are there a couple? This might not be fair of me to ask, but I'm going to ask it. You don't have to answer if you don't want to. Are there a couple things that every state with populations of wild turkey, that's 49 in the United States. Is there a couple things they can all do to contribute one way or another, whether it's a habitat policy or you look at a state like Mississippi and some others that have developed a turkey stamp, an in-state turkey stamp, where that fund is dedicated to wild turkey research, like anything.
I mean, honestly, to me, I would personally love to see states uniformly implement some type of fundraising mechanism like a stamp or something else that would be allocated specifically towards the bird, whether it be research or land management or outreach or anything that can positively influence turkey populations at scale, right? Not just, on this property or that property, but at a state level, because that's the level that agencies are managing at. And I personally would be in favor of that. And I understand people that say, I don't want to spend more,
Mhm.
but I get that. But speaking personally, and since you asked me the question, that would be something that I would like to see implemented. And if you think about it, um, if you were asked to contribute $5 or $10 to a stamp, and you're unwilling to do that because economically it's a hardship, I get that. But if it's just something you don't want to do, then I think you'd have to. I would say this, and people can get mad if they want. I think you need to look at yourself in the mirror. If you are unwilling, not if you're unable, but if you're unwilling to put that level of resource into the future of the bird in your state, then I think that's a problem. And I don't think you'd run across many turkey hunters that would oppose that. And the states that have implemented some of those programs, they have now resources available that otherwise would not be.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a huge one for me as well, and to your point, I think any turkey hunter worth their salt would be like, "Hey, here's $10 and probably here's another $5 if it helps." Like, we don't have a problem with that, and then, like, to that point, go the other way, and I started the conversation off kinda like this. If there was something detrimental and we had to back seasons off or even close a season for a little bit, I think we'd all, with the right integrity, stand there and be like, "Yeah, that sucks, but it's short term, and I'm okay. We'll step away for a little bit or do whatever has to be done to get things right." And I think it's a very small, selfish group that would not want to do any of that. And, um, you know,
I would kind of use this analogy. If you shoot TSS, you're spending $15 a shell.
yeah, or more now.
Right? Um, so would you be willing to give one shell
Yeah,
to ensure funding is available at a state scale in the state that you live in or hunt the most in?
I love that. I love that.
One shell, that's it.
And the reason I asked this question of you, because when it does come from a legislator who wants to see this and they bring it to a state commissioner board where they can make the rules or they do legislate it, or it's coming from the state agency, people in the state tend to be like, "Oh, they're trying to tax us again. They're trying to take more money," and and they get all fired up. Okay, fine. So we know that that argument's going to be there and baked in the cake. But when someone like you, who has spent his entire professional career on this one thing and try to improve it and literally make it better than he found it, I think your voice and your colleagues' voices speak so much louder than everybody else. And I think coming from you, there's just a level of integrity, a level of professionalism that no one else can come close to. So again, for you to say that, I think that carries an immense amount of weight, and I hope people hear it and they are inspired to. We get a lot of legislators that listen to this, and I'm hoping where they don't have it, they're like, hey, this is just some low hanging fruit. I can probably get into next session. Let's see if we can help out our state agencies and get people to do this. Coming from you, I think helps move that needle.
Well, that's very humbling. I appreciate you saying that. I kind of look at it like this: if we don't do something collectively as a turkey hunting community, let's back up. If turkey populations are going to be sustainable, we're going to have to be the ones to champion it. Nobody else is going to do that for us. So we have to figure out ways that we are going to prioritize the wild turkey. And if we don't, these arguments about techniques or
Mhm,
certain shells or certain guns, those will be moot at
mhm,
that point. And so I try to think about it a little bit bigger picture that, you know, it, if I gave $15 for this, if I gave my state agency more license to make changes to regulations or whatever, then in the grand scheme of things, if that influences me over the next 5 years, but it positively influences the bird 100 years from now, then it was worth the squeeze,
mhm.
right? But that's not the way we think as humans.
Right.
We tend to be very reactionary, and we tend to not like being told that we can't do what we were doing, or to what we're talking about, to pay more. And I get it. There's some states that I used to hunt in that if I can only hunt 1 or 2 days, I'm not buying a license to
Sure.
hunt in that state anymore because it's gotten so expensive and I just can't justify doing it. Um, but and the trade-off to us contributing resources to the engine that drives management of the bird is not something that looks attractive to me when I look out 30 or 40 years ago, from now, when I won't be here, and I'm trying to ensure that the wild turkey is sustainable.
And it stands to reason too, and it should be said. And this is something I always said when we were doing habitat projects with our volunteers when I was with the organization, is that we're not planting a stick with a sign in the ground saying this project, whatever we're doing, is for the turkeys only. So you buy that $10 stamp for turkey research, and then when you're delivering mission on the ground, whatever that research bears out and how you're trying to help. Well, it's not just for the turkeys. It's whatever other upland critter is there, what other non-game species is there that is gonna have some sort of effect positive effect in their environment from that because where the turkeys walk, so are these other critters, and they're going to be the beneficiaries of it. And turkey hunters would stand up.
Yeah, I mean, if you look, I talked about this with somebody the other day. If you look at the vegetative communities that turkeys really
Mhm.
thrive in, early successional vegetation, there's a suite of species that are also adapted to being in those same vegetative communities, and a lot of those species are in decline. And so, if you kind of step back big picture and think about what the natural world will look like in 50 years if we don't start making some improvements to the landscape, it's that's not something that's going to be positive, right? We can't continue to lose vegetative communities like we're losing unless we have to figure out ways to make wildlife priority. And that's not a, you know, that's not a one, let's do this one thing and it'll fix all of it. That's going to have to start at the, that's going to have to be everything from the political process on down to how we communicate to one another, how we interact with agencies, the amount of money that we are willing to allocate ourselves to support agencies and to support management efforts. And it's going to take all of us to be involved in that if we're going to ensure that we've got wild turkeys, decades down the road.
It really is remarkable through that American system of conservation funding that such a small percentage does so much for the good of all, and even dwindling it down to just species specific, a community of turkey hunters would are willing to do so much that still benefits all, and it's all self-funding. We're not going. You half the time you go to a general fund, ask for general fund money, it's like, get out of here, you can't do that. Okay, but then we're all doing it and they all wanna have a say on it. It's a real weird place to be sometimes and having these conversations, but I guess my point is there's a very small amount of us and we're doing all the work and we're happy to do so because it's gonna leave things, the cliche, better than we found them. And like you, I'm thinking a couple generations down when I'm dead in the ground, and I wanna make sure my great grandkids or whoever that is has that ability, that there's still, like you say, connectivity, there's still forests, still wild places, and that they can hear that turkey gobble. God willing. And hopefully, the answers you guys are searching for in your project will help better that and better the species diversity as well, so that you don't have these inbreeding populations that are just eventually going to breed themselves out. There won't be any breeding, right? Because that's kind of how those trends go.
Yeah, I mean, the scientific literature is replete with examples of animals that have become genetically isolated, and through time, the end result is never a good thing. I mean, the end result is population consequences, and what I want to understand is, are we already seeing that?
Mhm.
And if so, how do we mitigate it? And if we're not already seeing it, then when are we going to see it? You know, my fear is that we're already seeing population level consequences to say low genetic diversity and those types of things. But if I'm wrong and we aren't, well, when would we expect to in some of these populations? And those are things that if we can provide agencies with that information, then that's a powerful piece of information.
Last question before we wrap it up, and this just came to me as we were talking and thinking things through. From when you guys started this project, technology, specifically AI, has it's like every other week this thing's growing and it's getting smarter, like with the AI. Are you guys looking to have you already implemented AI strategies? And if not, where do you think AI can play a role in predictability? Because you got to figure like it's so self-learning and it figures things out and starts predicting things that it might give a direction. Or maybe I'm completely off and I'm thinking too science fictiony.
Well, no, I mean we use AI in my lab already. I mean the processes we use to process gobbling data is artificial intelligence. I think probably through time it will become integrated into everything that we're doing in some capacity. Um, Maybe I will retire, but I doubt it by that time because it's accelerating so quickly. And uh, I'll be honest with you, it scares me. Like
Mhm.
how rapidly things have changed over the last year or 18 months. it's concerning to me in some ways. It's incredibly powerful and can be used to such benefit,
Mhm.
but it can also be used in the reverse.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's one thing, I'm an older, I'm long in the tooth. And in fact, I could retire in a couple of years. And that's why you hire really talented young people
Mhm.
and you populate your lab with really talented young people, because they can kind of run the ship and help you navigate these complex issues as they come about, because they're intellectually thinking different than you are, and they have grown up in a world that's far different than what when I was a young person. And so, yeah, that's exactly why you recruit talented students, and you populate your lab with as many of them as you have funding to do that.
Sir, I appreciate it. Thanks for hanging through some of the technical gremlins. I think we finally got it here in the the last bit of it, but that's his podcast.
Don't jinx us. Don't jinx us. Yeah.
Always good to see you. It's not never enough for me. I always appreciate the conversations and could literally do it for hours. But safe travels, continued success this turkey season. We definitely look forward to catching up with you at some point, hear more about the research and whatever we can do at CSF through our National Assembly of Sportsmen's caucuses at the state level or federal level. Always a phone call away, and that's we want to again leave it better than we found it. And there's a way to work with our caucus members to help affect change in a positive way for wild turkeys. We're here to do it.
Sounds good. It was good talking to you. I look forward to the next time.
All right. Thanks, sir. Thanks for joining us on this edition of the Sportsman's Voice podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, your support is crucial, and you can help us out right now by leaving a review, filling in those 5 stars where available, sharing this episode with friends and family, and engaging with us socially. CSF can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter. Together, we can protect the outdoor sports we love and continue to keep you informed wherever you are. That's it for this week. Until next time, we'll see you later.